So here we go with the memory and the 10 toughest terms that I think that you're going to face in this unit. Number one, the difference between these two things, retroactive and proactive interference. And then I also paired those up with amnesia because I think this retro part in both of them kind of screws people up once in a while. So first, let's talk about interference. Remember, interference is an active process. So I like to think of it like interference in a football game. When there's passing interference in a football game, that means that the receiver, the person who's trying to catch the ball, is actively trying to catch the ball. You can't have passing interference before the ball is snapped. You can't have passing interference when there's nothing going on. You can only have passing interference when something's happening, when the receiver is trying to catch the ball. And so you can only have interference with memories when you are trying to find a memory. So you can only have interference when you are trying to find a memory. It's an active process. Whereas amnesia is just something that you've forgotten. So amnesia is anytime you've forgotten something, that's amnesia. So we can throw something in front of amnesia, source amnesia, retrograde amnesia, anterograde amnesia. We throw something in front of it, and it just means that particular thing we've forgotten. When we have interference, that means we're having trouble finding that memory. So it's an active process of picking out the memory. So interference is having a problem of getting that memory out. Amnesia means we've forgotten it. It's gone. We're not trying to get it out. We've just completely forgotten it. Okay, so we have to understand the difference between interference and amnesia. Those two will clear up some more things. Okay, so now more specifically, as we did the first time, retroactive interference, right? If we write this down and we make our little sign here, retroactive interference is when new information interferes with old, and proactive interference is when old information interferes with new. And like I said, just write this down. When you're taking the exam, write it down. When you're taking the AP exam, write it down. It's almost not even worth trying to remember why it is the way it is. Just write it down so you won't get it confused. Retroactive interference, when new information interferes with old. An example is you get a new locker combination and you can't remember your old one because your friend next to you had your locker from last year, and he was, hey, I forgot my locker, can you help me? And you can't remember it anymore because your new one's interfering with it. Proactive interference, old information interferes with new. You accidentally call your new girlfriend by your old girlfriend's name. And so your old information is interfering with the new information that you learned of your new girlfriend's name. Okay, so that's interference. That's actively trying to get those memories out. Retrograde amnesia, whenever you have an amnesia, like either retrograde or anterograde, we have to have some sort of brain injury or an accident. So we have some sort of, let's see, here's this injury, right? We have this brain injury. Okay? Everything before the injury would be retroactive. Okay? Everything after the injury is retroactive. See, I mixed them up right there. Retrograde amnesia. And everything after the injury is anterograde amnesia. Okay? So here's the moment of the injury right here. If you have retrograde amnesia, you've forgotten things before the injury. If you have anterograde amnesia, you can't form new memories. You forget things after the injury. And normally retrograde amnesia has some point back to where you'll just miss this particular period of time, and you might still remember stuff way before that. So for instance, you have an accident at age 17, you forget serious brain injury, and you forget everything back to age 14, right? You still remember things earlier than that, but between 14 and 17 you can't. So that's old stuff that you've forgotten. Anterograde, you can't form new information. And examples of anterograde, right, was Dory from Finding Nemo, and an example of retrograde amnesia is The Vow or Memento. Okay, so these things are probably the most confusing out of all the memory stuff, so practice this stuff. Then we come to another type of amnesia, source amnesia. So remember, amnesia means you've forgotten something. Source amnesia means you've forgotten the source. You've forgotten the source of where you've got the information. You remember the memory, but you don't remember where it came from. So for instance, You've probably done this. You've even probably told a friend, right? You told this friend this really cool fact about one of your favorite bands, and then your friend turns to you and goes, "Hey, wait a second, I told you that." And like, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'm sorry." So that was an example of source amnesia. You remembered the memory, but you forgot where you found it from. So source amnesia, you forgot where that memory originated from. All right, two things that we'll talk about next: effects, spacing effect, and serial positioning effect. Spacing effect has to do with rehearsal and studying. So spacing effect says if you have 4 hours to give, it's instead of using all 4 at once, it's much more effective to space those 4 hours out over with space in between, and the rehearsal will be much stronger. The retrieval will be much stronger. And the more times you space things out and the more times you study them, the quicker you're going to relearn them if you've forgotten them. So you're not going to remember everything. And so when you go to later on in life or at the final exam or on the AP exam, you go to relearn things. If you practice the spacing effect, you're going to relearn them more quickly because spacing works faster than just cramming and using all those hours in at once. Serial positioning effect is the idea that where the order in which you remember things matters. So the primacy effect, primacy is when you remember things at the beginning first and then you forget. This all gets hazy. The recency effect is where you remember things at the end, and then the stuff in the middle you remember the least well. So you remember the names. If you're meeting a group of new people, you remember the names at the beginning, and the end the best. The beginning is called primacy effect. The end is called recency effect. Finally, the last 4, we've got explicit memories and implicit memories. These have to do with your long-term memories. This was that chart that we talked about. Explicit is over here. Implicit is over here. Explicit memories are also called declarative. Right? You need to know both those terms. And implicit memories are also called non-declarative, right? Or it's also called procedural. So you really need to know all of these different ways. Implicit could be referred to as any one of those. Explicit could also be referred to as declarative. All right, it's called explicit or declarative because you have to actually actively go back into your memory and pull it out. Implicit memories are non-declarative or procedural, and I think I like this word procedural because it's stuff that you don't have to actively go back in and remember and actively process. So for instance, an implicit memory would be walking. If you're really good at twirling a baton would be an example. Riding a bike is an implicit memory. These are memories that you have to remember how to do, but you don't have to sit there and think about it every time. You do it without actively, consciously recalling it. If you have a brain injury or something, say you have a brain injury, and you might have to relearn to walk again, right? You used to learn how to walk, but now you have to relearn that. Okay, explicit would be declarative, where you have to actually declare. And this one kind of goes into two different categories, which is actually episodic and semantic memories. So episodic are memories of past events, and semantic is facts and knowledge. So your memory of this video right here, this is going to go in your semantic memory. This is a fact or knowledge. You go back in, you retrieve a fact out. That's your semantic memory. An episodic memory is a memory. Oh, you remember your 7th birthday party. You remember who was there. You remember how you felt. You remember what the cake was. That's an episode in your life. You have to actually go back in there and retrieve it, right? Remember, it's declarative. You have to be able to declare it. If you just say it out loud, it's not something that you just do unconsciously. So that's why it's an explicit memory, and as opposed to implicit. Remember, implicit is just something that goes on in the background. When you learn how to do something really, really well, it becomes an implicit memory. And then explicit is further divided into episodic and semantic. So a lot of stuff here. Go back through these terms, and you should do all right. Thank you.